All right, the dramatic countdown over once again. Robert Barnett, thank you so much for coming on today, sir.
Yes, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely, man. So, very excited to talk to you. I believe that when we kind of initially started talking about your appearance here on the podcast, I had been following the Modern Classrooms project already. But I guess to kind of get some introductory ground for most people here to start, first off, there's a question I came across and says, how do you describe what you do? So I guess how did you kind of go from being in the classroom teaching math as your was it that you said the two most difficult things is teaching and math, and that's kind of what it is you're doing. So I guess how do you get into teaching? What are the moments you start to see things needing a change, and when do you kind of take the effort to make that change?
Yeah, I tried making that as a joke in a talk and nobody laughed. But I said, I said, what's so hard
I
about
laughed really
teaching?
hard watching it.
I said, what's so hard about teaching math? Two things, the teaching and the math. I always like math, so I
Yeah.
didn't I didn't find the math that hard when I was a teacher. I found the teaching extremely hard. And the reason I found it hard was because in any given classroom, right, you have some students who are like me, they love math, they want the
Yeah.
challenge. You have some students who have gaps in their learning, they lack confidence because they haven't been successful in math in the past. You have some students who aren't there at all because something's happening in their life, or they're there but they're distracted. And if you're a teacher trying to give one lesson to all of those students at once,
Mhm.
you will fail to meet every learner's needs.
Mr. Clark After Dark is brought to you by Luxy. That's Luxy. Luxy is the standard for modern dating as it gives you a greater understanding of any potential match's intentions and background before you make your move. Swiping endlessly in other dating apps can be exhausting and often leave you with only the leftovers in your dating pool. Luxy is an exclusive platform with just a 10 to 15% acceptance rate, as well as a profile and income verification feature so you can be confident you're only connecting with those who meet your high standards. The community guidelines emphasize safety, trust, and equality by strictly prohibiting scams, explicit content, and harassment. 2025 is your year to stop settling. With Luxy, there is no luck involved, just real connections with people who truly match what it is you are looking for. Download the Luxy app today to see if you qualify for a better chance at finding the right person for you. And now, back to the show.
I I say that not as a criticism of any individual teacher, but it's just impossible that one lesson is going to meet every student's needs at once. And I spent a lot of time in front of a classroom trying to make it happen, and I was never successful. And I just felt like my advanced students are bored, my struggling students are lost, and when the absent students come in tomorrow, they're going to be totally behind because they missed it. So I was kind of miserable. I needed to find a different way of teaching. I did, by speaking with colleagues and researching and observing. What I basically did was instead of giving one lesson per day, I recorded my instruction on videos, very simple videos, right? Get on a video call with myself, explain something, record it, share it with my students. Now my students can watch those videos at home. They can watch them in class. They can pause. They can rewind. They can rewatch. They can ask me questions. I can spend my time working with them individually or in small groups. They
Yeah.
can start to move at their own paces. So those advanced students can zip ahead. Those students who need more time have it. The students who missed class on Monday can pick up where they left off. And most importantly, I could make sure that students actually mastered lesson one before they did lesson two. So often in school, we say, okay, yeah, I know you didn't really get lesson one, but today's lesson two, so good luck. That doesn't work for students and it's miserable
Yeah.
for teachers. And so yeah, I started teaching in this different way. For me, it was really effective. I mean, I enjoyed teaching. I saw my students enjoying learning more. I shared it with some colleagues. We started a nonprofit, to train other teachers. Almost 8 years later, we've reached about 80,000 teachers all over.
Wow.
And we help them teach this way too. It's not different from how most teachers are trained. So we want to explain how it works. We want to help teachers through the challenges of it. We want to help teachers feel like I don't have to stand up at the board and teach the middle every day. I
Yeah.
actually can use these practices to meet my learners' diverse needs.
Yeah, and so because two things I kind of came across that were I always kind of like to find the surprises in the bios almost. For example, like I had a teacher comedian on recently who also does bus driving. And so we had some interesting stories there. And coming across yours, one like a Guinness World Record for whoopee cushions. That was, and I do have a point of where I'm going here. And then the other one was that you actually graduated from Harvard Law. Is that correct?
Both of those are true, yes.
Okay, so well, I guess kind of what I'm wondering is you are obviously a product kind of the conventional system, but also yielding very great success, right? It's not everyone kind of goes through Harvard Law School and kind of does well like yourself. So I guess did you kind of see something missing for yourself in your own education, or was this kind of a new problem that you noticed when you started teaching?
Well, it doesn't take that much education to set the Guinness World Record, which I helped set, which was about 2,500 people simultaneously sitting on whoopee cushions at a minor league baseball game. Yeah, I showed up. I had no idea, but there was someone there from Guinness, and it was in the newspaper. And
Yeah, and that's your
yeah,
call to fame.
yeah, I had a great educational experience, which is why I was able to go to a great school like Harvard from the day I started pre-K. I went to small schools and I had teachers that pushed me and that challenged me. I had great support at home and I had a lot of, success academically because I was in places that could meet my needs. Even still, there were times when I felt like, okay, well, I already understand the content, so I'm not really challenged. There were times when I missed class and fell behind, and, felt lost. There were classes I took where I struggled. And, I remember that feeling of like being a student who was struggling and like, feeling frustrated. The teacher's lesson doesn't make sense to me. Like, I need some help. Can you provide help? And fortunately, I was able to get that help, whether it was I could stay after school or I could, work with my parents or something. So yeah, I had a great educational experience, but it wasn't perfect. And, I think if you think about your own education experience, or if anyone listening does, you can probably think about these were classes where I really felt challenged at my level, appropriately challenged. These were classes that were just so easy for me and I was so bored. And these were classes that were too hard and I didn't succeed. And so what I'm trying to figure out is how do I help teachers make every class appropriately challenging for every student? So the student who's advanced, the student who's struggling, the student who's been absent are all challenged every day.
And so, am I correct on saying? 'Cause I had one of the questions I put in here was the idea of the flipped classroom, which I know I can't remember her name, but I believe she's someone from Alberta who pretty much, as a former social studies teacher myself, she kind of would put all the resources out there, each unit, and that was kind of the way she did it. So, pretty much, you do almost no direct teaching in front of the classroom. That's kind of the idea behind the modern classroom. Is that fair to say? Everything's
Yeah,
pre-recorded with assignments, and then everything is self-paced all year, so you are kind of more so facilitating the direction of the classroom, and it maybe not even like it's not like it's project learning either. It's just kind of self-paced content learning. Is that kind of
yeah. I mean, I'd make a couple little small
please? Yeah,
amendments. You have
yeah,
the basic idea exactly
yeah.
right. In a flipped classroom, I always think the students watch the video at home and then they come learn together in school.
Yes.
And
Okay.
that is good. That's much better than the tradition and the alternative, I think. But one challenge in a lot of flipped classrooms is if all the students are doing the same lesson every day in school, you still have this challenge where some students might be ahead and bored, some might be behind and lost. So I think you need to have self-pacing where students are moving at their own paces. And some students don't have great, you know, internet access at home. So I never felt it was fair to expect or require students
Yeah.
to watch at home. The other thing is about self-paced learning. So in my classroom and in most modern classrooms, it's not like you start on day one, see you at the end of the year, get as far as you can. We don't want the gaps between students to grow that big because then students who fall behind may feel too discouraged or, we want students working together, which happens if they're working basically on the same set of lessons. So In my class, I usually let students go at their own paces for a week or two at a time. And then I said, okay, by next Friday, this is what I expect you to learn. The test will be next Friday. Everyone takes the test next Friday. So
Oh, okay.
I hope you be prepared for it. And
Yeah.
then the following Monday, we're going to start again with another block like that. It's not a perfect system. It involves trade-offs, but to me, it was a way of giving some kind of structure, keeping students
Yeah.
together, making sure we covered the high points of the curriculum while also giving students autonomy and some independence and making sure I could respond to what every learner actually needed.
Yeah, because I do think that one of my questions is going to be kind of how to balance the assessment, because obviously you don't want one student to be like, hey, take the test today so I can take it tomorrow. And I know the students will always talk, and you can only kind of make so many variations of each assessment as you're going through it. And honestly, like everything that you're saying is like it makes so much sense that like I have kind of often joked that people don't laugh at either, where I say like, no, that makes too much sense, like we can't do that, like god forbid we change something that makes way too much sense. So I guess, what do you think are kind of the main barriers to implementing this type of classroom structure?
Yeah, I think what I hear a lot is this makes a lot of sense, but it's too hard to do in the current system,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure how to do it,
Yeah.
like on a practical day-to-day level. So I think it's hard to figure out how to do self-pacing when you have a certain number of students for a certain amount of time and a certain syllabus to get through, right? And we expect that every 16-year-old in, Washington, D.C., where I taught, is going to learn the same math skills this year. And so that naturally leads you to, well, if they're going to get all this by this year, I got to do this today and this tomorrow and this the next day. And so it can be difficult to think how that fits into self-pacing. The way I did that is I said, look, it's inevitable that if you move at your own pace, some students are going to learn more than others. I'm going to just try to prioritize within each week or two and say, this is what everyone should learn. This is some of the stuff you should learn, but if you got to skip it, it's okay. This is the real aspirational stuff advanced students should try to learn. And even if you don't get through everything in the full 2 weeks, it's okay because you can always go back. I have my videos to do it. So it takes a little bit of a willingness to say, I'm going to accept the fact that students are going to cover different amounts of content. You have to be willing to do that. And my belief is it's way better for a student to get through 60% of the content than really understand it than see all the content and not understand any of it.
Mhm.
So you've got to take that sort of like philosophical and in some way emotional leap to say, look, I'm not going to just force every student through every piece of content.
Yeah.
Once you've taken that leap, you also need to just think about practically, how do I do this? How do I organize my videos? How do I create or find videos? How do I track progress? If some students are on lesson one, some are lesson two, some are lesson three, how do I keep track of that? How do I organize my classroom? There's a lot of like, what do I do with my time as a teacher? There's a lot of very
Yeah.
practical questions too. And so I think what Modern Classrooms Project tries to do is is make the case for the philosophical leap that actually we're going to be better off if students achieve mastery
Yeah.
versus receive a uniform amount of content regardless of understanding, and then provide the practical tools. Here's the simplest way to record a video. Here's how you track students' progress. Here's a diagram of 4 different ways that teachers have organized their classrooms. Pick the
Mhm.
one that works for you. That's the gap we're trying to fill, is convincing teachers that this is possible and then showing them how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think one of my former professors, the running joke that he would always kind of start the semester with was, school is a place where students go to watch teachers work. Like they're not actually really learning anything. They're just like kind of watching us, I guess, pretend to be busy at the front of the room while no one actually really learns anything. And I think when it comes to any sort of innovation, like I see things like project based learning and like these entrepreneurial classrooms. And I know there's a lot of talk about like 2 hour learning days with like private schools in the US where they do like 2 hours of AI kind of AI based. I'm actually not quite sure how they do it, but it's only a 1-2 hour block a day where using artificial intelligence to kind of move them throughout their lessons. And then like the afternoon is for like social emotional development and like kind of more so structured around play. So I am kind of seeing the path that we're going toward of the public system of, I guess, being a bit more open to this type of change. On the flip side, no pun intended on flipped classroom there, I think that we only go as far as the way that we are, like how our teachers rewarded with contracts. Like I think still, like when a principal does an evaluation, what is the expectation? The expectation is that they're going to come into your room and watch you do a lesson, kind of like in that way. So I guess what would you say to like a superintendent or a principal, I guess, about how to kind of change the way that we would evaluate our educators? Because that's the way that we reflexively always go back into this is how you're supposed to teach when we're kind of being shown that we can teach.
Yeah, totally. I wrote something recently and I was just thinking like nowadays compared to 5 years ago, the
Mhm,
gaps among students are greater as a result
mhm,
of COVID. Students
mhm.
have greater gaps. They need more. And what I said to teachers is if your students need to learn more, you need to do less, right? So that the students do the
Okay.
work.
Yeah, I like
Sometimes
that.
we feel like, oh my God, my students are behind. I got to cram it down their throats even harder. I got to stuff their heads full of knowledge. Actually, what you need to do is do less so that students take on the work, students take on the ownership of learning in the class. I love to tell my students, they'd say like, well, can you just explain it to me? And I'd say, look, I already know this content. It's your
Yeah.
job to learn it. I did explain it to you in the video, or like your classmate knows it. Go ask them. I think our job as teachers is not so much to teach in the way that that is traditionally understood, like deliver information, but to help students learn. And I think we need to give students you know, give them the responsibility, make them think, and that
Mhm.
that means we sometimes need to do less. I totally take your point about
Yeah.
observations and what we're
Yeah.
expected to do. And when you watch the movies, the teacher is standing and delivering, and that's really hard to shake. I felt like when I was beginning as a teacher, I felt like, all right, I'm going to go in and I'm going to give this great grand performance. I know what I'm going to
Everyone's
teach.
gonna love it.
Like, and I'm like, it was so exhausting. And after I did the modern classroom approach, I'd feel like I'm going to show up today and I'm going to help my students learn. And it wasn't like laziness. I put in plenty of time behind the scenes to create the learning
Yeah,
experience.
because recording videos is no small feat. Like that is like, especially when
Yeah.
you're doing it for with such intentionality. Like obviously, you and I have recorded for 18 minutes so far, but it's like if you try to record like a 4 minute video on a specific concept, that takes probably 2 or 3 hours of going through, kind of re-recording, re-saying things, editing it, etc.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's an investment because once you have the
Yeah,
video, you don't need to repeat it 4 times a day for as long as you teach, right? It's
sure.
there. And I always tell teachers like, the video doesn't have to be perfect. The video just has to be personal. It has to get the point across. And so
Yeah,
if I'm standing at the board explaining things, I'm going to stumble over my words. I'm going to make mistakes. Like,
yeah,
I'll do that in my videos. So what? Yes, I could make a perfect 4 minute video, but maybe it'll be 5 minutes and I'll
yeah,
make a
yeah.
few mistakes and like it'll be human and all of that. So there is an investment, but I think it pays off in the long run. And yeah, that's like I really like that. I'm gonna show up today and I'm just gonna help my students learn. And by the way, once you put something in front of students that they can succeed on, I found that they want to succeed on. Like sometimes people say, well, what if your students just don't care and totally disengage? And I feel like students disengage when they're in a class that's where the teacher's saying something that's too easy or too hard or they're lost. When you put something in front of a student and say, you've got the time to learn this, I'm here to help support you in learning it, and you're going to learn it at your own pace, and I'm going to make sure you understand it, that's really powerful for students. They're going to want to learn, they're going to want to succeed. And so didn't happen overnight, right? It takes time to instill that sort of culture in your students. But yeah, I think the students are the one that need to be putting in the work, and the teacher should be there as the source of support.
Yeah, because I even think for myself, like teaching social studies, like I taught grade 11 and 12 for a few years. I'm in like a resource position this year, but I think about, okay, like how could I have done, like clearly the teacher that I brought up earlier with the flipped classroom taught social studies, and that was kind of her main thing. But I do find that my favorite part of a social studies classroom is like the unexpected tangents during the delivery of the content. So I guess even kind of what you're saying, a way to build the schedule and saying like, we are going to have a discussion on Wednesday for 30 minutes, or we'll do group projects where we will all work on this project on Wednesdays, but then Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, you guys do your like my pre-recorded work with their assessments. Is that kind of the, I guess the path I'm going down here is you taught math, and this is kind of based specifically with your experience on math, but I guess how does that apply to that kind of humanities side of the other side of the hallway, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I taught math, but we've worked with teachers, amazing
It's
teachers,
all essentially the same.
who used this approach for everything. And math is not always so rote as one skill after the next.
Yeah,
It's possible to have fun in math every once in a while. Yeah,
occasionally.
yeah, I would not say that, like, if you're listening to this, I love whole class instruction and
Yeah,
whole class discussion, but I
yeah,
don't think it's a good default means of delivering
yeah.
information, because some students know it, some students aren't prepared to understand it, and some students aren't there. It's great for building community. It's great for having fun. I love starting off the math class with an interesting warm up where I get all my students talking. I love the day before the test saying, put the computers away. Let's play a review game, form teams, and let's do some puzzles. I love stuff like that. On a day to day basis, I don't love standing in front of the room policing behavior while students are not appropriately challenged. And so that's what we talk with teachers about. Like, you want to have a big whole class discussion about some issue of great importance? Great, amazing. Put it on the calendar. Let students prepare for that discussion at their own pace so that every student comes to the discussion prepared. You want to start class every day or end class every day with an activity that builds community.
Hmm.
Great.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be all hour the whole time. Yeah,
Put the direct instruction on video so that students can still access it. And actually I felt like sometimes, those whole class activities can be more fun, more dynamic when you don't have this time pressure of, oh my God, I've got to get through the lecture today. Say the warm up problem is super interesting in math, or you have an interesting social studies discussion question at the beginning of class. If your lesson plan is planned down to the minute and you got 5 minutes for the discussion because then you have to do a lesson of 40 minutes and your
yeah.
students are really into it, you're like, look, guys, sorry, we got to pause the
Oh, we
discussion.
got
We
to
got a
move
lesson to
on. Yeah,
teach. What I can do in my class is say, hey, this is super interesting. Let's keep talking about it. Oh, by the way, if you feel like you're behind and you want to just go to the back of the room and catch up on the computer, that's okay. We're going to keep discussing it up here. Wow, we talked about that for 20 minutes. Well, I guess you guys maybe have to watch the video at home tonight, to stay on pace. There's just so much more freedom and flexibility versus that rigidity that I think is necessitated by a whole class lesson where you say, look, teachers say this to me all the time. I got to get through the content.
yeah.
And I
I
say,
yeah, I know.
I
I
say,
hate that. I've said it
what?
myself, but I do hate that. I hate when I say
What a depressing
it.
state of affairs that's what teachers perceive the job to be. I got to
Yeah,
get through the content. And I say that all the time too, but I have to think, I didn't become a teacher to get through the content. I became a teacher to inspire young people. So, like, how do I put all the content online so that I just spend my time, hanging out with the kids and helping them learn?
yeah. And so I guess kind of give me the scenario where, because I would say you're definitely one of the earliest like adopters of this kind of transition. I'm not sure what year specifically you exactly started it. 'Cause I think you Anyway, it's the first day, you've recorded a lesson, and the admin walks by and you're just sitting there. Like, what is it that you kind of learn to do differently while, like, let's just say all your students are working, or is it still pretty much just, like, I guess what I'm getting toward is, was there any fear of the judgment of peers, of administrators, that like you kind of felt like you had to keep explaining yourself, or was it pretty seamlessly integrated into what you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, I want to correct one thing. I started teaching this way in like 2014, 2015, but I mean, people have been teaching this way for a long, long time. And even if you
Mhm.
think about it, I'm talking about self-paced, mastery-based learning. The original modern classroom is the one-room schoolhouse, where you have
Yeah.
students of all different ages moving at
Yeah.
their own paces, doing their own things, and the teacher's saying, okay, Lucas, you're ready for this, do this, and I'm a totally different age, totally different thing, work on this. So, and ever since there's been computers with videos, students have been watching videos. There were cassette tapes that people listened to at their own pace. Like I say that to say I think we're in a long tradition here with a lot of research behind it of mastery-based education has been shown to have benefits for a long time. And Modern Classrooms Project is, yes, we use video because this is the technology of the day, but it's really based on pedagogical principles. Yes, the number one complaint that teachers get is, how come you're not teaching me anymore? From students and parents and administrators. Like, why are you not teaching? And I feel like, well, number one, if I've made the video, I'm teaching 20 times more because my students can all watch the video, you know, anytime they want. And it is weird to walk around the room and hear your voice from like
Yeah.
more than 100 someone's. But, I'm just, the role of the teacher really, really changes. And so, you know, yes, it's amazing when you have a moment where you can just sit and like relax for a minute and your students
Yeah.
can learn. I mean, imagine that. What could be better than
Yeah, I
that?
know. Like, why does that have
Yeah.
to be weird? Like, why does that
Yeah.
need to
Why is
be a
that?
weird thing?
Why is that bad?
Yeah.
If
You
you
don't
can
hate
do
yourself
that,
and you're not burnt out, why are you here?
yeah, and all your students are engaged and working without you like
Yeah.
cracking the whip on them. I mean, that's the dream. No,
How
I mean,
dare you?
what you end up doing as a teacher is you walk around the room, you check in with young people, you sit down with them,
Mhm.
you know, um, and different modern classroom teachers do this very differently. Some like to get up and walk around the room and sit down with their students. Some teachers prefer to say, look, I'm at my desk. You have a question, come talk to me. I like that approach too. You put the onus of learning on the students. So yeah, I think what I would say is, yes, you're right. I'm not standing and delivering anymore, but I'm delivering this instruction in a way that's much more accessible to my students. I'm having much better interaction with them because I don't spend half the class telling them to be quiet. I spend the whole class sitting with them and getting to know them. And I found that, teachers and parents and students are rightly skeptical of things that feel new. It's so important in education that we shouldn't be experimenting with, kids' futures. And there's a lot of negativity around technology in the classroom because there are situations where students sit on the screen for, an hour and it's just totally dull and lifeless. And so they come in with all of that. I think once students understand the video replaces the direct instruction, the video lasts 5 or 10 minutes. Then I close my screen, I work with my peers, I sit with my teacher, we hang out together, we help each other learn. And, I can look at my class and tell you exactly what everyone's doing at every time, what they understand, what they don't. Like once people understand it, I think they like it. So yeah, there's a lot of skepticism, well
Well,
deserved.
I
I
think
think
the
when
go ahead.
no, I think when people understand why, they're bought into the how it works.
I think it's hilarious just as you're saying that because, like, for example, I'll go on Khan Academy to review a math concept, but that's how I relearned it. But then I feel like I have to go and then teach it live to everyone all day and then teach it 4 times. Like, why couldn't you assign that video for the students to watch and like do the same kind of assessment where like you're kind of just adding more work for the sake of adding more work? And that seems like to me the direction of where things kind of need to go. And do you think even too when you're looking at things with the modern classroom, do you see this potentially going into like, could you have a class of like 60 or 70 with like 3 or 4 teachers in the room? Is that kind of something that you might see? Or I guess, do you see a difference as this continues to grow? I guess for like how classes are composed or like how you should go about developing culture of classrooms or something that you think a whole lot about?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you said about watching Khan Academy, by the way. I always think about this with my bike. Like, I like riding my bike. Sometimes I have an issue with my bike, like the brakes
Yeah,
weren't working well.
yeah,
I could sign up for a class in bike maintenance at a local
yeah,
university and show up every Wednesday night for 2 hours and
yeah,
hope they get to my thing, right? I'm on YouTube trying to understand it. And when I get stuck, I go to the bike shop and I wait for an expert, and the expert helps me get unstuck, and then I figure it out. So that's
yeah,
how we learn as adults, right? Isn't that how the students should learn? They
yeah.
shouldn't sit there for an hour hoping I say something. They should find the knowledge and ask me questions. In terms of like how school should be structured, yes, we have had situations where, teachers in schools that adopt this approach. There are two teachers, social studies teachers actually in Virginia. They were next to each other. They both took the training, and they asked their principal, "Can you just knock down the wall between our classrooms? Because rather than each doing the same thing with our 25 students, we'd rather have 50 and two teachers and have it be much more flexible." And walked into the classroom. It's amazing. That to me is that can work. If you ask me, we should get rid of age-based promotion, and we should,
Yeah.
we can keep students in elementary and middle high schools, but you should progress based on what you need that day, and you should go from one teacher's room to the next when you have mastered the content, not when you go away for the summer and get a year older.
Mhm.
In terms of my and Modern Classroom's day-to-day work, we don't talk too much about that because we're just
Yeah.
so laser focused on
Yeah.
how do we help an individual teacher. And, I was in a very traditional public school system when I did this. So this is not like, how do we find teachers in alternative schools to help? We're trying to help any teacher anywhere do this. And that's the battle we've chosen to fight versus let's get rid of age-based promotion. I think once you start teaching like this, you can't help but think there's got to be a better way to organize school. Like, I think the techniques at Modern Classrooms, they'll help you meet the needs of a class where some of your students are at a 12th grade math level, some of your students are at a second grade math level, you know, and like you're supposed to teach ninth grade math.
Yeah.
We can help you do that. A better question is probably, can we organize school so that we don't have the 12th grade math level and the second grade math level in the same room expected to learn the same thing? So
Mhm.
it's not the fight we're choosing for now, but if anyone listening can help us get rid of age-based promotion,
Yeah.
thank you.
And it's almost kind of why I've always enjoyed kind of being in split classes when you're like having 2 or 3 grades, because it almost forces you to realize that like that's what you kind of should be doing anyway. Like it doesn't need to be that everyone's the exact same age. Like I think if you had like junior high cohorts of rooms, I don't know, that's kind of the way I see it. And I would believe that as an educator, kind of like you're saying, you learn so much from watching others teach, like joining these classrooms and being able to sit with another teacher and talk to them and plan with them all day, every day as part of that process, I feel like would be so beneficial, I think, for anyone that wants to do it. But yeah, so I guess maybe to kind of lean us toward the end here a little bit, if you were to say maybe like one thing to like university admission programs to say like this is the difference of how pre-service teachers should be taught, because I do think, even as you were talking there before, that the public school systems are genuinely crying out for change. Like I think there's such a concerted effort to like move away from those models. But I do like, so for example, I'm in New Brunswick, Canada, and the grading system in middle school is pretty much like a 1, 2, 3, 3 plus, or a 4. So there's kind of that's the grade that you would receive. And now that what gets baked into that number is it differs from subject to subject, but interactions and participation do play a part in the giving of that number. Now, is that a good thing to do to kind of move away from like a 67% or a 73%? Perhaps, But then the question from parents in a public system, generally speaking, is okay, well, what does that 2 mean? Like, does that mean it's a 55? Does that mean it's a 60? It's always the reference back to like what percent they get. And I just think that parents that would go through the effort of putting their kid into a private school or an alternative school are likely going to be more understanding and willing to embrace change for their child, if that makes sense. I guess how do we, I kind of might be asking the same question here about trying to eliminate okay, we want you to do different things, but not that different thing.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the reason I believe so strongly in this is I'm a parent myself, and my kids are quite young. They're 4 and 2, but my 4-year-old is in a pre-K program, and I do not want him going in to school tomorrow and learning what a 4-year-old is supposed to learn. Like, I want him to go in and someone says, "This is where Joshua is in his reading. This is what's next for him." Like, I'm going to give Joshua what he needs. I don't care about the average 4-year-old, and like I was a high school teacher, so it's hard for me to assess. Seems to me that he's advanced in some ways and he's struggling in other ways. And some days he gets sick and he misses class, and like he needs to be caught up. So I want what's right for him, not what is right for someone at his age. And I think like if we thought about that, that's the place to begin with education, changing education is look, in any class, there are a bunch of kids with a bunch of different needs. How do we meet as many of those needs as possible at once? And so I think if I were, if I were talking to a pre-service teacher, I think my training as a pre-service teacher emphasized a lot like lesson planning and behavior management. And I think the idea was if you have a good plan and you can get the kids to listen, you can engage them. I think that's totally backwards. If you can engage them, you get them to behave. But a single, like having them all do the same thing every day, it's not gonna engage them. It's not gonna work. And so I think, like, if we think of our goal as educators as figure out what each student needs and provide it, that's the way to do this. And I don't think, by the way, I'm not advocating that in a class of 25 students, they all have 25 different lesson plans or they do 25 different things. That's too crazy. They should all do the same thing. They should just have different amounts of time to do it. And then every student can learn at a high level. So, yeah, that's the constraint I think we need to play with a little bit is time.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that. And because I think too, yeah, I had a thought and I just lost it. My train just went right out the window there. But anyway, to kind of wrap us up here, Rob, I think one thing I typically ask all the guests before they log off is a response to a quote. So I'm a big quote guy myself. It's education is what remains once one forgets everything that they learned in school. So I guess what is it that you want students to take away from their time with you, Mr. Barnett, that they won't get from anyone else?
I'll give you a quote in return.
Sure.
Some people look at the way things are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not.
I love
So,
that.
I think yeah, I would like students who learn from me, teachers I work with, to think, yeah, things don't have to be the way they are. There might be a better way to do things. I don't know if the modern classroom model is the best way to do things, but I know that the traditional model wasn't working. And so, I tried to think about what would be best for my students. Why not? Yeah. And someone else said, I never let my schooling get in the way of my education, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No one's made an appearance on here before.
Okay, good. Yeah. So how do
Yeah,
we
yeah.
how do we get students to focus on, educating themselves and growing as people and not just like, you know, this is the content that every 14-year-old needs to.
Yeah. And I just remembered it. I was thinking, like, you've touched a lot on mastery so far. And I think, too, when you give students the opportunity to kind of even learn just a little bit ahead of their peers and they've mastered it, like, they'll experience that, like pleasurable feeling of helping others and feeling competent. So I think that might even be an underrated part of the project here. So now you got to go. Rob Barnett, thank you so much for coming on today, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Yeah, I gotta say one other thing also though is that
Absolutely, yeah.
pleasure of learning isn't just limited to the students who are ahead. There's a
Yeah.
student in a school today who's been sitting in math class for the past 6 years and has never felt the pleasure of learning, right? Because they started out behind and they never caught up, and every day it's just like the struggle to keep your head above water and get that one or two to get to the next grade level. They never had the time to experience the pleasure of learning. So we got to give every student a chance to have that learning. Anyways, I could go on, but I do
I
have
know.
to
That's
now.
all right. That's
So
all good, man. Thank you.
anyways, I really appreciated the conversation, and thanks for having me on.
Of course, man. Anytime.